In 1941, Japan invaded French Indochina, today's Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, to remove any imports into China, which included war supplies purchased from the United States. The move prompted the United States to ban all oil exports, which ultimately brought about a preemptive military strike from Japan, due to running extremely low on supplies and oil and attempting to prevent the U.S. from interfering with Japanese military action in Southeast Asia. On December 7, 1941, at the height of World War II, tensions between Japan and the United States reached an all-time high when Japan launched a surprise aerial attack on an American naval base called Pearl Harbor in Oahu Island, Hawaii. The attack lasted 7 hours and was made up of two waves of attacks from 353 Imperial Japanese aircrafts. The attack killed 2,403 U.S. personnel and destroyed 19 U.S. Navy ships. The various crosses, stars, and medals were awarded to the American servicemen who distinguished themselves in combat at Pearl Harbor. On December 8, 1941, President Roosevelt delivered the infamous speech calling for a formal declaration of war on the Empire of Japan. The UK had also done this 9 hours prior.
The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
The attack led to the end of U.S. neutrality in the war. Mr. Rodriguez, one of our U.S. history teachers, explains how these events brought the U.S. into the war and the immediate response in the form of the Doolittle Raid on Tokyo.
Mr. Rodriguez, today we're going to be asking you some questions about the U.S. involvement in Pearl Harbor. So the first question is, how do you think the attack took a toll on U.S. neutrality, and do you think it was for the better or the worse?
Well, it depends who you ask. There were many Americans opposed to the United States entering the war, and that came to a crashing halt with the Pearl Harbor attack. Neutrality ended, and those that were against U.S. involvement in the war, well, they were forced to go for it, such as Charles Lindbergh and the American First Committee. So they were basically silenced. America was catapulted into the war in the Pacific side. And eventually the Europeans, when the Germans declared war on the U.S.
All right. Thank you, Mr. So what were the events that occurred afterwards?
Well, the U.S. had to mobilize for war. They were not ready. The U.S. had to basically build its army. By the spring of 41, the U.S. stopped manufacturing of all automobiles and dedicated only to the sole production of war material. The U.S. also wanted to get Japan back somehow, some way, to rebuild American morale after such a massive attack causing, several thousand dead in Pearl Harbor. So the U.S. got ready for another attack, and that, I believe, came forth from the Doolittle Raid.
Mm-hmm.
The Doolittle Raid was a bold mission. It basically did very little harm physically to the Japanese war machine, but psychologically it was devastating to the Japanese, because now they knew that America could hit Japan, and they knew things were coming. The Doolittle Raid, most of the men participating in that raid were captured or killed. The ones that did make it made it to China, and they were eventually returned to the United States as heroes, obviously.
The United States entered the war in the European theater, and after victory in Europe Day in May 1945, turned its full attention on Japan, ultimately culminating in the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August of that year. The aftermath of the war led to the formation of the United Nations and the start of the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union.